Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1, The Masked Trail. It was nearly a year ago to the day that I lived through what I still consider to be one of the most traumatic experiences of my entire life. Even now, as I sit down to recount it, I find myself hesitating. The memory's still raw in places I didn't know I could feel. I've never been much of a writer, and I can't remember the last time I wrote anything longer than a grocery list. Probably not since high school, but something about this event haunts me to my core, and I believe writing it down might help me reclaim some sense of control. It started innocently enough. My best friend and I, both lovers of moody weather and quiet trails, decided to go on a hike. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. A steady drizzle falling and the air crisp and quiet, the trees tinged with those familiar oranges and reds. Most people hate the rain, but I find peace in it. We assumed the trail would be empty, what with the cold and the fact it was a weekday. And we were right. When we pulled into the trailhead parking lot, after our 40-minute drive, there wasn't a single other car in sight. That added an eerie charm to our trip. We weren't afraid, we were excited. The idea of having the entire forested path to ourselves was thrilling. With our boots laced and jackets zipped up tight, we stepped into the woods, crunching along a carpet of wet leaves, breathing in the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes in, my friend stopped suddenly. His eyes were locked on something in the trees. I followed his gaze but saw nothing at first. He pointed about 20 feet off the trail. "There," he said. "Doesn't that look like a face?" I squinted. At first I thought he was seeing things, but as my eyes adjusted to the light and shadows, I saw it too. A pale oval shape peeking out from behind the bark, perfectly still, perfectly silent. It did look like a face, cold and watching. We left the trail and approached it, curiosity pulling us through the underbrush. As we got closer, it became clear that it wasn't a face. Not exactly. It was a plastic mask, cheap, white, and nailed to the tree in a way that it blended unnervingly well with the bark. If you hadn't been looking, you wouldn't have seen it. We stood there for a while, staring. It seemed out of place, forgotten, but also deliberately placed. My friend pulled it down, brushing aside the branches. Inside the mask was a folded slip of paper. Against my better judgment, we opened it. It read number 1. "Go behind this tree and continue walking until you find number 2. I told him to leave it. Maybe it was part of some old Halloween event put on by the park or something harmless. But he was more curious than cautious and continued off the path. I hesitated but eventually followed him. We found a second mask buried in the dirt about 50 feet deeper into the woods. It had another note, just as vague. This continued 3 more times. 5 masks in total, each with a cryptic message, leading us deeper into the forest. The final note simply said, "See you soon." That line sent a cold shiver down both of our spines. We laughed nervously, brushing it off, but something about it felt wrong, as if we had disturbed something we weren't meant to find. I remember thinking I heard something beyond the trees, soft shifting, the sound of movement, but I chalked it up to wind or animals. We shook off the feeling and made our way back to the trail, eventually returning to the car a couple of hours later. That's when we noticed a car had parked next to mine, too close. So close, in fact, that I had to pull forward so my friend could open the passenger door. It was odd, but we didn't dwell on it. On the drive home, we talked about the masks again. It must have been a prank, we agreed. A creepy, well-planned prank. After dropping him off, I went home, took a shower, made some dinner, and settled in to watch the football game. By around 11 p.m, I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when I heard something outside. At first I dismissed it. I live alone, and my house is tucked in a quiet neighborhood, but something urged me to look. When I did, my heart dropped. There were 5 figures standing motionless on my front lawn. I recognized the masks instantly. They were the same ones from earlier that day, white, plastic, lifeless. I ducked out of sight and ran to my bedroom window to get a better view. The figures didn't move at first. Then, in unison, they began dancing in a strange jerky rhythm. They would run to my front door, ring the doorbell furiously, then retreat to the lawn and resume their bizarre, silent celebration. I called the police immediately, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, and I did. From my bedroom, I watched them through the blinds, my heart pounding louder than their footsteps. The worst part wasn't the masks or the dancing. It was the fact that they didn't speak, not one word. They just rang the bell, slammed on the door, sometimes using their bodies like battering rams, and then stepped back. The minutes crawled by. I thought I might pass out from the fear and tension. 10 minutes after my call, red and blue lights finally lit up the street. At the sight, the masked figures scattered in all directions. 2 officers gave chase, but returned shortly after, shaking their heads. One of the officers took my statement. I tried to explain the whole mask trail ordeal, but without any proof, and with no signs of forced entry, there wasn't much they could do. Call again if they come back was all they said. I installed a Ring camera the very next day. I haven't seen them since, but I think about that night constantly. The way they moved, the note, "See you soon." The proximity of their bodies slamming into my front door. It plays in my head like a looping dream I can't wake up from. I've tried to convince myself it was a Halloween prank taken too far. Maybe it was. Maybe some bored people with a twisted sense of humor. But that doesn't explain how they found my house, or why they watched me without speaking, or why they seemed to know exactly what they were doing, when to move, when to stay still. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I hadn't locked my doors, if I had tried to go outside, if I had ignored my gut and brushed off the feeling I had in the woods. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know if it was a game to them, or something darker. I don't think I want to know. All I do know is that the moment my friend pulled that first mask off the tree, something changed. Something followed. Maybe it had been waiting there for years, for someone curious enough to follow its trail, or maybe we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The thing about fear is, it lingers in the quiet moments, and even now, a year later, I still double-check the locks before I go to sleep. I still look out the window before I draw the blinds. That final note, "See you soon," still rings in my head sometimes, late at night, when the house is too quiet, and the wind brushes the side of the house just right. I catch myself waiting, not sleeping, not breathing, just waiting, and hoping, above all else, that the masked figures never come back. I never found out who they were. I never found out what they wanted, and I pray every day that I never have to. Story 2. The Man in the Woods. There's something about the fall that's always drawn me outside. I've never been one for sitting indoors when the leaves start to turn and the air begins to cool. Growing up, I'd jump at any chance to be outside, hiking, camping, even just walking along the shorelines of a lake or a river near my town. If the activity had anything to do with the outdoors, I was there. That love for nature stayed with me into my teenage years, and when our high school offered a weekend camping and hiking trip into the mountains, I didn't hesitate to sign up. I was thrilled when a few of my friends decided to come along too, especially since it meant missing school on a Friday. That Friday afternoon, under a canopy of autumn leaves and chilly grey skies, we hiked the beginner's trail. The mood was light-hearted, filled with laughter and jokes. We weren't concerned about anything, just kids enjoying a brief escape from the routine of classrooms and textbooks. There were 15 of us on that trip, along with 3 teachers who supervised and coordinated the hike. The trail wasn't difficult at all, and by the time we stopped to set up camp at around 5:30 p.m., we were still buzzing with energy. My friends and I were assigned to the same tent, which only added to the excitement. We were supposed to observe lights out by 10 p.m., but that didn't stop us from staying up late, playing Pokemon on our Nintendo DS consoles, and whispering about school gossip. It was a golden time of innocence and freedom. The teacher eventually scolded us for making too much noise, forcing us to power down our games and go to sleep, but I couldn't drift off right away. I remember lying there in the quiet, hearing twigs snapping Leaves rustling, normal forest sounds. I told myself, maybe even one of the teachers making rounds, but still, something about those noises felt different, like something was watching from beyond the shadows of our little campsite. The next day, my lack of sleep faded quickly once we hit the trail again. Hiking always had a way of energizing me, and we all fell into rhythm as we walked. That evening, one of my friends floated the idea of sneaking out after dark to play games, or just hang out beyond the tent's reach. I was hesitant. I'd always been the type who followed the rules, especially when we were out in the wild, but the thrill of rebellion, mixed with the desire to make unforgettable memories with my closest friends, was hard to resist. So, after pretending to go to bed early, we waited until the camp had gone still. It was close to midnight when they woke me, and groggy though I was, I joined them. We tiptoed into the woods with our DS consoles, walking a fair distance from camp to a quiet patch under a few large trees where we could sit, joke around, and battle our Pokemon in peace. The first half hour was perfect. We laughed, we played, and for a little while, it felt like we were the only people in the world. Then we heard it, the sound that would change everything. It was rustling in the trees. All of us froze, heads snapping in the direction of the noise. My first thought was an animal, maybe a bear. My heart dropped, imagining what we'd do if one came charging out at us. But what emerged from the trees wasn't an animal. It was a man. He didn't speak. He didn't look at us. He just walked toward our group and without hesitation, sat down within our semicircle like he belonged there. We were stunned. He looked to be in his 40s, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. His clothes were strangely formal for the wilderness, but they were dirty and worn. He didn't meet our eyes or speak a word, just stared at the ground as if in deep thought or trance. None of us knew what to do. Our voices caught in our throats as we exchanged terrified glances. We didn't dare speak to him or move. His presence was silent and heavy, almost dreamlike, but filled with tension. Eventually we made an unspoken agreement. Stand up and walk away slowly. We counted silently in our heads, and then together, rose to our feet. The man stood too, mimicking our motion, yet still not saying anything. He didn't follow us at first. He just stood there, eerily still. Then we ran. Fear took over, and we sprinted through the trees, branches snapping underfoot, hearts thundering. I glanced over my shoulder and, to my horror, saw the man jogging after us. Not running, not trying to catch us, just keeping pace. That image, his pale face bobbing through the trees with no expression, is seared into my memory. There was something deeply wrong about him, as if his soul wasn't behind those eyes. We finally made it back to our tent, zipped it shut, and collapsed inside, trying not to make a sound. We never told the teachers. We were too scared, too ashamed for breaking the rules. So we stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every snapping twig or gust of wind. We whispered about what we saw, trying to make sense of it. Was he homeless? Lost? Mentally unwell? Or was it something else entirely? Something less human? The next morning we packed up our gear, hiked out of the woods, and went home. None of us were ever the same. We promised not to talk about it again, to bury the fear, to forget, but none of us really could. Years later, whenever the leaves begin to fall and the breeze carries that familiar chill, I think of him, the man in the woods, the stranger who joined our circle like he'd been waiting. Now that I'm older, I understand how incredibly dangerous that situation could have been. We were just kids, out in the forest, isolated from help, and yet the man never spoke, never lunged, never tried to hurt us. He just appeared, and I often wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run. Would he have kept sitting there? Would he have tried to speak? Or did he chase us because we interrupted something we weren't meant to see? I'll never know. And maybe that's for the best. The unknown is unsettling. Yes, but it also leaves room for hope. Hope that he was just a lost soul, not a dangerous one. But the truth is, I don't really believe that. I believe something was wrong with him. Something primal. Something empty. And the fear that rises in me each fall isn't about what did happen. It's about what could have. There's a reason I don't hike at night anymore. Even now I won't set foot in the woods after dark. No matter how familiar the trail, the darkness hides too much, and the mind fills in those blanks with shapes and faces you pray are figments of imagination. That man taught me something valuable, not about survival or safety, but about silence. His silence was louder than any scream. His presence, calm yet disturbing, was more chilling than a growl or a threat, because you can reason with anger. You can respond to noise. But how do you handle someone who just exists in your space, watching, moving, mirroring, without cause or reason? There's a terror in that stillness, in the lack of answers, in the absence of sound. I still don't know where he came from. I still don't know what he wanted. And that, more than anything, is what keeps me up at night. What keeps me awake isn't the chase, or even the sight of him appearing from the dark. It's the possibility that he wasn't alone. That maybe there are others like him, wandering through the trees, drawn to the sound of laughter and light-hearted games played too deep in the wild. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed behind, if I'd looked into his eyes a little longer, if I'd spoken to him. But every time I wonder, that image returns to me, his motionless figure, then the sudden mirrored movements, the slow pursuit, and his absence of emotion. Not hate, not menace, just nothing. And that void, that's what truly terrified me. Not the man, not the moment, but the emptiness behind his eyes. The chilling reminder that sometimes, out there in the woods, you aren't as alone as you think. And sometimes, the thing that finds you doesn't want to harm you. It just wants to watch, to follow, to wait. Story 3. The Shack in the Autumn Woods. Autumn has always been a sacred time of year for me. The leaves turning crimson and gold, the comforting chill in the air, and the soft crackle of dry foliage underfoot make the world feel like it's paused in a beautiful, fleeting moment. October, especially, holds a special place in my heart, not only because of the festive traditions or the color of the sky just before sunset, but because that's the month I married the love of my life. This October would have marked 15 years of marriage. We had just celebrated our anniversary the previous weekend with a quiet evening at home, reflecting on the years that had passed. The following Saturday we planned nothing elaborate, just a cozy, laid-back afternoon of pumpkin picking and sipping hot apple cider at a large farm just outside town. The day began like any other full day, but it would end in a way that neither of us could have predicted, with a memory so strange and unsettling it continues to haunt the quiet corners of my mind. The farm was lovely, one of those sprawling places where families go to take seasonal photos, and couples like us walk hand in hand through rows of pumpkins, letting nostalgia and crisp air fill their lungs. We listened to a live band, ate sugary donuts, and sipped warm drinks while watching children laugh and run across hayfields. It felt like a perfect day. But as we were getting ready to leave, I noticed something in my husband's expression. He wasn't ready to go yet. With a little nudge and a hopeful grin, he suggested we visit a nearby hiking trail. I hesitated. Hiking wasn't really my thing. Too many bugs, too much dirt, and too many unknowns. But I knew it meant a lot to him, and since we were already in the area, I agreed. The trail he mentioned wasn't far. It was a short drive through back roads, surrounded by tall trees just beginning to drop their leaves. I remember thinking it would be a brief, harmless detour, something that might make him smile and wouldn't cost us more than an hour. When we arrived at the trail's parking lot, though, we were met with disappointment. A large wooden sign had been placed across the gate, reading, "Closed for renovation. Reopening May next year." My instinct was to turn around. We weren't even supposed to be there, and the last thing I wanted was to get in trouble for trespassing. But my husband, perhaps caught up in the charm of the day, pointed out that several other cars were already parked in the lot. "Look," he said, "we won't go far, just the first bit of the trail, just a peek." I hesitated, but eventually I gave in. We climbed over a chain-link barrier and walked carefully past some orange construction equipment. No trespassing signs hung here and there, fluttering in the breeze like forgotten warnings. I felt uneasy, but I told myself we were just going to take a quick look and leave. Still, as we stepped deeper into the forest, my nerves tightened. There was something too quiet about it all, something unnatural in the way the wind barely stirred the leaves. We had only been walking a few minutes when my husband noticed a structure just off the trail. It looked like a small portable building, something clearly not old or abandoned, but newly placed and out of place among the trees. Probably a break room for the construction crew, he whispered. I didn't care what it was. I wanted to leave. But he was curious. Against my instincts, I followed him. The shack was modest, built from plain wood with a small window and a metal door. As we got closer, I heard voices, muffled, tense, male, several people, at least 2 or 3, talking in low tones. We froze. My heart began to race. My husband leaned in closer to the window while I crouched beside the wall, trying to make myself invisible. I couldn't hear what they were saying, only the hum of angry voices on the other side of the thin wooden wall. He cupped his hands to the glass and peered inside. A moment passed. Then I watched the color drain from his face. He dropped down quickly, panic in his eyes. His voice trembled as he grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. I didn't ask questions. His urgency made my heart pound, and without another word, we bolted back toward the trail. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to come running after us, but no one did. When we got back to the car, he was already in the driver's seat, starting the engine before I'd even closed my door. He kept checking the rearview mirror all the way home, his jaw clenched, fingers tight on the wheel. I asked him again and again what he saw through that window, but he wouldn't tell me, not once. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he stepped out of the car and called the police, alone. He sat in the vehicle for nearly half an hour, speaking in hushed tones. I stood on the porch, watching him, feeling more confused and unnerved by the second. That night, I begged him to tell me what he saw, but he pleaded with me not to ask. Please, he said, tears welling in his eyes. Please don't make me relive it. Just let it go. Against every instinct, I agreed. I thought maybe, in time, he would feel ready to share, but the weeks passed. Then months, then years, and he never spoke a word about it again. Whatever he saw that day in that shack, it shattered something in him. He never slept the same after that. Each night, after I drove, I would wake up sometime later and find him sitting on the couch in the living room. Not watching TV, not reading. Just staring at the front door. Waiting. He would sit like that until the sun began to rise. Then, and only then, would he curl up and finally fall asleep. Sometimes for just an hour, sometimes not at all. Even now, I don't know what he saw. Maybe it was something criminal. Maybe something dangerous. Or maybe it was something unexplainable. His reaction wasn't one of shock, it was terror. A kind of terror I'd never seen before. The kind that lives in a person's bones long after the moment is over. I've never pressed him again. I promised I wouldn't, and I've kept that promise. But I see how it weighs on him. This silent burden. Some nights, I think I hear him whispering to himself in the dark, as if trying to reason with what he saw. Other times I catch him checking the locks on every door and window more than once. Whatever was inside that shack changed something in him. It reached past logic, past explanation, and embedded itself into his soul like a splinter too deep to remove. There are days I wish I hadn't agreed to that hike, that I had just insisted we go home after the pumpkin patch, but we did go. And we did see something we were never meant to see. And the price we pay now isn't something visible or tangible. It's a shadow that lingers over us. A silence that fills our home at night. And though I'll never truly understand what happened, I know that some places are closed off for a reason. Some trails, some doors, some conversations. They're sealed not out of inconvenience but out of protection. Whatever lived behind that window, it stole something from my husband. And to this day, I pray that it never decides to come looking for the rest of us. Story 4. The Woman in White. It's been more than a decade since that day, and I still can't find the right words to explain what I saw. My wife and I have always shared a love for hiking, especially in the fall. We live in the northeastern United States, where the changing leaves transform the forests into a living painting. As summer fades and October rolls in, we make a tradition of taking longer, more ambitious hikes, ones that stretch deep into the woods and away from the noise of town. We'd been on many trails over the years, but one October afternoon, We decided to try something a bit different. There was an unmarked trail we'd heard about from a few local enthusiasts, one that wasn't officially maintained or documented, but supposedly safe and beautiful, with a map, a compass, and more than enough experience between us. We felt confident venturing off the usual path, and at first it was everything we had hoped for: quiet, vibrant, untouched by crowds. The forest welcomed us with a gentle stillness that only fall seems to carry. We had hiked for several hours when we stumbled upon a clearing unlike any we'd seen before. It was a perfectly round patch nestled deep in the woods, with 2 old stumps perfectly placed for resting. The space felt almost designed, like nature's own rest stop. We sat down, shared some protein bars and water, and let the silence wash over us. For a while it was peaceful. My wife smiled at me in the way she always does when she's most content. It was one of those moments that feel eternal. But just as we were preparing to continue our journey, we heard something, a rustling just beyond the trees. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a squirrel or the distant cry of a bird. It was deliberate, irregular. We stopped moving, stopped breathing almost, just to listen more closely. I thought it might be a bear at first. My wife thought maybe a deer. But the sound didn't match either. It was light, but chaotic, like someone pacing. We crept forward, curiosity outweighing caution, parting a thick wall of brush with our hands. That's when we saw her. A woman barefoot, wandering in erratic patterns through the trees. She looked young, early 20s maybe. Her dress was a flowing white, striking against the earth-toned forest, though stained and frayed at the bottom. Her blonde hair was tangled, and her arms waved slightly as she mumbled to herself, lost in some rhythm we couldn't hear. Her feet were black with dirt, as if she had been walking for days. We stood frozen. There was something off about her, something that reached beyond sadness or confusion. It felt unnatural. My wife, compassionate and fearless, called out to her, asking if she needed help. At first, the woman didn't react. She just kept pacing and murmuring. But when we raised our voices a second time, everything stopped. The woman froze mid-step, shoulders stiffening. She slowly turned her head toward us, and then she hissed. It wasn't a scream or a shout. It was a full animalistic hiss, sharp and feral. Her eyes locked onto us for a moment, unblinking, and then she turned and bolted into the woods. Despite being barefoot, she ran faster than either of us could have imagined. My wife chased after her instinctively, shouting for her to stop, insisting she might need help, but the woman was too quick. Within minutes she had vanished into the forest's endless maze. I stayed near the clearing, rooted in place, unsure whether to follow or wait. I watched the trees shift and settle, hoping she'd emerge again. She didn't. When my wife returned, breathless and shaken, we both stood there in silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Eventually we made our way back to the trailhead, our casual hike now carrying the weight of something deeper, something far from natural. Once we were back in range, we called the local ranger station and reported the encounter. A ranger met us near the entrance, and we explained everything: her appearance, her behavior, the spot we had last seen her. The ranger was skeptical from the start. He told us we shouldn't have been hiking in that area, warned us that off-trail routes were discouraged, and implied that we might have simply imagined it. Still, they promised to check the area. A small search was conducted over the next few days, but no trace of the woman was ever found. No footprints, no discarded items, nothing. We even checked missing persons reports, hoping her face would appear among them. It didn't, and as time went on, our story began to sound more like a myth than a memory, but we knew what we saw. And we never went back to that trail again. Something about her eyes still visits me in dreams. Not angry, not sad, just hollow, like she wasn't there at all. My wife was disturbed by the encounter, more than she let on. For months afterward, she carried guilt that she hadn't been able to help. She wanted to return and look for her, convinced the woman was still out there, lost or worse. But I had a different feeling. I don't think that woman was meant to be found. I don't think she wanted help. There was something about the way she moved, something not bound by the usual laws of the world. And while my wife believed we witnessed someone in distress, I feared we had witnessed something else entirely, something wearing the shape of a woman, something that had learned to mimic human pain, but lacked the soul behind it. Sometimes the forest doesn't hide people. Sometimes it houses things that were never meant to walk in daylight. I've come to accept that I may never understand what we saw, and that's okay. There are things in this world that don't need explaining. To this day, I sometimes catch myself scanning tree lines when we hike. Even when we're on a marked trail, even in daylight, I watch for flashes of white between the branches. My wife and I never mention her anymore. Not directly. But I know she remembers. Whenever the wind picks up suddenly, or the leaves seem too still, she squeezes my hand just a little tighter. We've never seen the woman again. And yet somehow, I feel she's still out there, drifting through those woods, maybe waiting, maybe watching, or maybe simply lost in a place where the rules of time and reason no longer apply. Wherever she is, I hope she's at peace. But part of me knows the truth. There was no peace in her eyes that day, only a kind of restless silence, and that's the part that still haunts me. Not what she did, but what she didn't. Not what she said, but what she might be. Years have passed since that day, and life has carried on. But every fall, when the world begins to quiet again, and the air turns sharp with memory, I find myself thinking of her bare feet, her tattered dress, her sudden hiss and unnatural speed. She doesn't feel like just a story I tell around a campfire. She feels like a secret the forest entrusted to us. And some secrets aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be remembered. So now, each October, I light a candle in our backyard, something quiet, something personal, and I say a small, silent wish for her. Whatever she was, whoever she was, I hope she finds the light. Because if not, I fear she'll keep wandering forever, lost between the trees, never seen, never saved, and never quite gone. Story 5. The Hidden Church. Every fall, my friends and I make it a tradition to leave behind the dry heat of Nevada and fly across the country to experience the cool, vibrant forests of upstate New York. It's an annual pilgrimage of sorts, something we started over a decade ago. And every year it feels like a quiet reunion with a part of ourselves we only rediscover when we're deep in nature. Our destination is always the Adirondack Mountains, where the air smells like pine and the silence feels earned. The change of season there is breathtaking, leaves shifting from green to gold to crimson, mountains touched with fog, and lakes mirroring the painted sky. We rent a small rustic cabin and gather around maps, laughing and sipping hot drinks while planning our hiking routes. We've grown older, but the ritual remains the same. This particular year, our trip began like all the others, with Luis, our de facto trailmaster, guiding us with his usual confident calm. Luis is the kind of guy who could survive on his own for weeks, living off tree bark and intuition. We trust him implicitly. He's never led us wrong. He chose a moderate route this year, promising fewer challenges and more scenic views. We weren't looking to test our endurance. We just wanted to immerse ourselves in the fall landscape and maybe stumble upon something unexpected. We packed up our gear early that morning, layered in warm clothes, and set out into the quiet of the woods. The trail wound gently through towering trees, mossy boulders, and stretches of mist where the sun tried and failed to break through. We snapped pictures, joked quietly, and let the silence between us speak the language of old friendships. But after a couple of hours, Luis paused ahead of us, one hand raised like a conductor bringing music to a halt. He said he saw something unusual just off the trail. At first we thought it was nothing, maybe a trick of the light or a fallen structure. But as we followed him carefully through the trees, the outline of something remarkable began to take shape. Hidden between the dense growth and vines was a building, weathered but sturdy, with a pointed steeple rising above the tree line. The church, in the middle of the forest. It looked ancient, like it had been built by hands long forgotten, and then swallowed by time. A wooden cross still perched atop the steeple, and the windows were cloudy with grime. We approached slowly, unsure if it was safe, but drawn to it all the same. The doors groaned as we pushed them open, revealing a hauntingly preserved interior. Wooden benches lined the nave, leading to a small altar. The floor was littered with melted candles, wax long since hardened into strange rivers. It was silent inside, and yet the air felt thick with something unspoken. None of us said much. We moved around quietly, like guests in someone else's memory. Louise picked up an old Bible left between the pews. The cover was cracked, its title barely legible. He tucked it into his backpack as a keepsake. Something about the place made it feel more like a relic than a ruin. And just when we thought we'd seen everything, Louise noticed something behind the altar. A few of the floorboards sounded different beneath his boots. Hollow. We helped him move the small altar to one side and found 2 rusted hinges embedded in the wood, a trapdoor. We exchanged glances, unsure whether to open it. Curiosity won. The door creaked open, revealing a dark square hole with a faint musty smell rising up. We took turns shining our flashlights down. It was about 8 feet deep, the bottom just visible dirt, cobwebs and something else. Against my better judgment, I climbed down. The air grew warmer as I descended, oddly warm for a cold October afternoon. The space below was lined with stone walls, hand-carved it seemed, and covered in strange, faded symbols. Not language, not drawings, something between the two. They spiraled and crisscrossed, filling every visible surface. At the far end of the chamber was a small hole in the wall, boarded shut with decaying planks and bent nails. I felt the heat radiating from that hole, like standing near a furnace with no fire. I called up to the others, describing what I saw. Louise urged caution, but I couldn't resist. I tore away a few of the boards and peered into the void. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The hole continued forward, a narrow tunnel with no visible end. It was like staring into the throat of the earth. I didn't crawl in. Something about the darkness felt deeper than space. It wasn't just absence of light. It was the presence of something else. Something watching. I climbed back up and told the others what I'd seen. One by one, they peered down themselves, whispering in disbelief. We stayed there for a while. The 5 of us gathered inside a forgotten church, pondering the purpose of that tunnel, the trapdoor, that warmth in the cold. Eventually we left. We retraced our steps through the forest, a quiet weight pressing on each of us. Back at the cabin, Louise contacted the local ranger station to report the church and the underground passage. They told us the area was technically restricted and that the underground chamber was likely part of an old mining site, but there was no official record of any church being built in that zone. Nothing in the archives. No mention of worship, no history. We did some digging of our own in the days that followed. The mining theory checked out to an extent. There were rumors of abandoned shafts scattered throughout the region, but none of them connected to a church, and none of them accounted for the symbols or the heat or the eerie preservation of that building. We wondered if the church had been built over something older, something buried. Why was it so far from any town or road? Why was it still intact while everything else had crumbled? The ranger dismissed it as an old, forgotten project, nothing to worry about. But we couldn't stop thinking about it. That darkness beneath the altar, that sensation of being watched, that heat like breath from the ground. It didn't feel like a mine. It felt like an opening, a gateway. And for the first time in all our years of hiking, we left the forest with more questions than memories. Now each fall, when I hear the wind brushing against the windows or see the golden light filtering through the leaves, I think of that church. I think of the moment the altar moved, the hinges creaked, and the earth whispered its secrets to us. We haven't gone back, not because we're scared, but because some places are meant to remain unexplored. Some doors once opened don't truly close. And even though I tell myself it was just an abandoned church above an old shaft, there's a part of me that believes otherwise. That tunnel wasn't leading down, it was leading in. And the forest, in its silent wisdom, had let us look, but only once. That's why we keep our distance now. We still hike, still chase the colors of autumn, still breathe in the cool, sacred air, but we don't go off trail anymore. We follow the map. We stay in the light, because somewhere out there, beneath the roots and the soil, something ancient still breathes. Story 6. The Man by the Creek. Hiking has always been more than just a hobby to me. It's a form of therapy, a ritual I depend on to keep my mind clear and my heart settled. I hike year-round, through every season and every weather pattern, but something about the early fall calls to me in a way no other time does. The beautiful space between September and October is my sanctuary. The air is brisk but not biting. The trees are alive with rich, fiery color, and, most of all, the trails are empty. I live in a small coastal town that swells with tourists during the summer, but once Labor Day passes, it empties out like someone flipped a switch. The silence that follows is a gift I cherish. Most mornings around that time, I take my dog out and wander the trails behind my home. The woods there are thick and deep, laced with a winding creek that cuts through the land like a vein. I've hiked those paths for 17 years, long enough to know every bend and slope by heart. That morning started like so many others. My dog and I stepped out into the cool morning air around 10 a.m., and we made our way down to the creek. The trees rustled gently, and the water whispered as it flowed over smooth stones. It felt like any other peaceful morning, and my mind was already drifting, thoughts light and slow. But everything changed in an instant when my dog froze beside me. Her growl started low, a rumble deep in her chest, and then grew into full-on snarling. She's usually calm, curious at most when we encountered deer or other animals, but this was different. Her entire body tensed, tail low, ears flat, her hackles raised. I tried to soothe her, whispering her name, stroking her fur, but she wouldn't relax. And then, without any warning, a man burst out from the trees across the creek. He sprinted through the water, boots splashing violently in the current, and then stopped dead on the opposite bank. The water was swift and cold this time of year, but he had powered through it like it was nothing. I instinctively ducked down into the brush with my dog, holding her collar tight as she whimpered and growled, her body still shaking. At first I couldn't tell if he saw us, but then he turned, slowly, and stared directly at the bushes we were hiding in. There was no doubt he had seen us. The man wasn't tall, maybe 5'6", with a slightly round frame. He wore dark, soaked clothing, and his face was pale. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring, his mouth slightly open, and then he spoke. In the lowest, most disturbing voice I've ever heard, he said, "I see you." I felt my chest tighten. My hands went numb. It didn't sound like a joke or a threat. It sounded rehearsed. He repeated it, again and again. "I see you. I see you. I see you." His voice didn't change. His tone didn't shift. It was like a broken record, playing just for me. I wanted to run, to grab my dog and bolt for the road, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, anchored by fear and disbelief. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, he rushed toward us, charging back into the creek, water exploding around him, eyes wide, arms slightly outstretched. My dog lost it, barking and snarling like I'd never heard before. I stood up, panic flooding every cell in my body, and prepared myself for whatever was about to happen. But just as he reached the edge of the bank, inches from me, he stopped. Just stopped, dead still. His face curled into a grin, revealing yellow, rotting teeth. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. And then, without warning, he let out a scream. It wasn't just a loud yell. It was a full-body, blood-curdling, nightmare-fueled scream that shook the very air around us. It felt like it came from deep inside him, like something had clawed its way out through his throat. I flinched, heart racing, when my dog barking so violently I could barely think. And then, just as suddenly as it started, he stopped screaming and began to laugh, a horrible, gurgling, joyless laugh. He turned around, walked back across the creek, and stood on the opposite bank, still staring at me, now laughing quietly to himself. My hands fumbled for my phone. I prayed for a signal, and by some miracle got one bar. I called the sheriff immediately. He's an old friend of mine, someone I trust. I didn't know what this man was planning, but I wasn't going to let him disappear into the woods, especially not with my house just a few minutes away. I kept my eyes on him the whole time, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear the wind. The man didn't move from his spot, just stood there rocking slightly, grinning, soaked from head to toe. I told the sheriff everything, begged him to come quickly. Thankfully, I wasn't far from the trail entrance. Within 10 minutes, the sheriff and 2 deputies pulled up and made their way down to the creek. They approached slowly, hands open, trying to speak to the man calmly. But he didn't respond. And then, without warning, just like before, he lunged, this time straight at the sheriff. The deputies tackled him instantly, pinning him to the ground as he screamed and thrashed. It took all three of them to restrain him. Even handcuffed, he wouldn't stop screaming. It was awful. Inhuman. And then, just like that, it was over. They loaded him into the back of the car, and he finally fell silent. The sheriff returned to me later, shaking his head. They found no ID on him. Nothing but a kitchen knife in the inside pocket of his jacket. When they questioned him, he claimed he didn't know his name. Didn't know where he was. Didn't know why he was there. Just stared straight ahead and muttered nonsense. They suspected mental illness or drug use, but even that didn't fully explain his behavior. Eventually, they transferred him to a state facility better equipped to evaluate his condition. I never found out who he was or where he came from. Nobody in town recognized him. No one had seen him before. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't brought my dog, or if I hadn't called the sheriff when I did. What if he had followed me home? What if he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to find him? Since that day, I've been more cautious. I still hike, still love the woods, but I stay closer to marked trails and avoid the creek when I'm alone. The thought of that man, his voice, his scream, his eyes, lingers in the quiet moments of my walks. And even though the sheriff reassured me they handled it, that he wouldn't be back, I can't help but wonder, because people don't just appear like that, not without a reason. And part of me believes he wasn't just wandering aimlessly. Part of me believes he was drawn to something. To me. Maybe it was random. Maybe it was fate. But whatever it was, I know this. When I go hiking now, I listen more closely. I watch the creek carefully. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear a voice whispering through the trees. Not loud, not angry, just soft, repeating the same 3 words over and over again. I see you. Story 7. The gesturing finger. Every year, when the leaves begin to change and the days grow shorter, I give myself a week to reset. I clear my calendar, silence my phone, and retreat into the comfort of solitude. It's a personal ritual, something I do to realign my mind, to shed the anxiety that builds slowly and quietly throughout the year. Sometimes I'll spend a day watching horror movies with the lights off, or visit a nearby orchard to pick apples and sip cider in the cool air. But I always make time for a hike. There's something about being alone in the woods, wrapped in the scent of pine and soil, that calms the racing thoughts in my head. It brings me back to something simple, something real. I usually return to the same set of trails near my town, familiar and safe. But 3 years ago, a friend of mine suggested something different, a more secluded trail, one that wasn't officially marked but, according to him, was well worn by those in the know. He gave me detailed directions, complete with a specific mile marker and landmarks to help me find the entrance. He also warned me to bring my own trail markers, just in case. Though I'm no stranger to hiking alone, I appreciated the extra caution. So, I prepared. I packed extra water, some granola, a flashlight, and small white flags with little light crosses printed on them to mark my path. I parked near an unassuming patch of trees, locked my car, and stepped into the forest. There was no formal sign, no welcome marker, just a faint dirt path winding into the trees. As I walked, I began placing the flags behind me every few hundred feet, tying them to branches or sticking them in the ground near unique landmarks. The hike was beautiful, quiet still, untouched. The colors of fall were at their peak, and every step felt like walking through a forgotten painting. The forest hummed with life. I stopped often, taking pictures and letting the breeze wash over me. Before I knew it, over an hour had passed, and I hadn't made it very far. My mind wandered from the scenery to the personal, thinking about work stress, family obligations, unresolved emotions I'd carried for far too long. I sat beneath a tall oak tree, drank some water, and tried to breathe more deeply. As I sat there in the stillness, something strange happened. The forest went silent, not gradually but all at once. The birds stopped singing, the leaves stopped rustling, and even the air felt heavy. I snapped my fingers near my ear to make sure I hadn't gone deaf. I hadn't. The sound was real, or rather, the absence of it. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, The forest came back to life. It was like someone hit a pause button and then pressed play again. I felt a chill run through me. Something wasn't right. I decided it was time to head back. I retraced my steps, following the white flags. At first, everything seemed normal. But after a while, the placement of the flags started to feel off. One was tied to a tree in a direction I didn't remember taking. Another was in the center of the trail, where I knew I never would have placed it. I stopped and stared at it, my heart beginning to pound. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe I was tired. I kept moving, but the forest seemed to change. The trees felt closer together, the air colder, the light dimmer, even though it wasn't yet evening. Then, up ahead, I saw 3 flags grouped together, standing in a neat row in front of a large moss-covered rock. Except it wasn't a rock. As I got closer, I saw what it really was, a shed. A small, rotting wooden shed, overgrown with leaves and vines, almost completely hidden by time. I took a step back. I hadn't passed this on my way in. I would have remembered. I scanned the area for familiar landmarks but found none. My heart raced. I wasn't where I was supposed to be. Then I heard it, a creak. The door of the shed, barely visible through the brush, slowly opened, just a few inches. And then, a hand appeared in the opening. Not an arm, not a body, just a hand. One finger extended, slowly curling toward me in a beckoning gesture. "Come closer." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The hand didn't move again. It just stayed there, waiting, motionless except for that silent call. I turned and ran. I didn't care if I was going the wrong way. I didn't care if I got lost. My legs moved before my thoughts caught up, and I tore through the forest, ducking branches, leaping over roots, the pounding of my heart louder than the wind. Eventually I stopped to catch my breath. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and activated the car's alarm, hoping I was close enough to hear it. A faint beep echoed in the distance. I followed the sound, tears in my eyes, lungs burning. The alarm grew louder. My feet hit gravel. I saw my car. Relief washed over me like a wave. I dove into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine without looking back. I drove until I found a rest stop and sat there for nearly an hour, trying to understand what had just happened. I wanted to believe it was stress, a hallucination, my brain playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew better. I wasn't imagining it. The hand was real. That shed was real, and someone or something was inside, waiting for someone to wander too far. I haven't been back to that trail since. I haven't even asked my friend about it. I don't want to know who else has been there, or what stories they might have brought back. I hike now only on marked trails, during daylight hours, with other people. I still carry flags, but I check them constantly. I count them. I don't let them out of my sight. And I never ignore a silence in the forest. Because silence isn't empty, it's a warning. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stepped closer, if I had accepted the invitation. Would the door have opened wider? Would I have seen who was inside? Or would I have simply vanished? Another ghost story whispered by trees that remember everything. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I see the shed again. I see the way the door creaked open, the way that finger moved. So slowly, so deliberately. I wake up sweating, heart racing, hand gripping the side of my bed. And even though I try to shake it off, the memory lingers. It's not just fear, it's certainty. The kind that nestles deep in your bones and never leaves. There are places in the world we were never meant to go, paths we were never meant to follow, and doors we should never open. The forest knows this. It gives us signs, but sometimes we don't listen, and sometimes when we stray too far, the forest doesn't give us a second chance. It just waits, quietly, patiently, until we're too close to turn back. Story 8. The Red-Eyed Visitor. When I was 17, I spent the summer before college living with my grandfather in a remote mountain cabin. He had lived there for decades, content in his solitude, miles away from the closest neighbor, surrounded by woods and wildlife. I went to help him around the property, cutting firewood, cleaning the gutters, repairing some of the fencing, and to get away from the noise of home before life changed forever. My parents thought the quiet would be good for me, and truthfully I did too. The air there was crisp, filled with pine and dew, and the silence stretched for miles. At night, it was so dark that you could see stars in constellations I didn't even know existed. My grandfather, a stoic man of few words, had rules. Lock the doors before dark. Don't go sunset, and the trailing after sunset. For sunset says respond a voice calling your name in the night. He never explained the rules and I didn't ask. He wasn't one to tell ghost stories or feed superstition. He simply stated the rules and expected them to be followed. I laughed a little when I first heard them. I thought maybe he was joking, trying to spook me. But the way he looked at me, calm, serious, eyes fixed, told me otherwise, and when the first few nights passed without incident, I began to think maybe he was just being cautious. Maybe it was a bare warning disguised as folklore. But then, about a week into my stay, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange tapping on the window. Not loud, not frantic, just a soft rhythmic tap. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed and held my breath. The curtains were closed and I told myself it was a branch, just the wind, maybe an animal. But then I heard it. My name, whispered, from outside the window. Ryan, a pause, then again. Ryan, come out here. The voice was soft, almost melodic, like someone trying to coax a child to sleep. My stomach dropped. I wanted to move, to scream, but my body locked in place. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the night. I remembered what my grandfather said. Never respond. Never open the door. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. The whisper came again, more urgent this time. Ryan, I see you. I clamped my hands over my ears and shut my eyes, praying for it to stop. Eventually it did. The tapping ceased. The voice vanished. Silence returned, but it was a suffocating, heavy silence, like something was still watching me just beyond the walls. The next morning, I told my grandfather what happened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't laugh or look surprised. He just nodded, poured me a cup of coffee, and said, "You did good. Never answer it." That was all. No further discussion. No explanation. Just that quiet warning reinforced. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had whispered my name was still out there. That night, I slept with the light on and moved the bed away from the window. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, some mix of wind and imagination, but it happened again. 2 nights later, same time, same soft tapping, and this time the voice wasn't outside my window, it was outside the front door. "Ryan, it's cold out here. Please let me in." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was familiar now. It wasn't just a whisper. It sounded like someone I knew, like my mom. But I knew that couldn't be true. My parents were hundreds of miles away. "Ryan, please, I'm scared." It begged, softly, repeatedly. I pressed my back to the wall and listened, refusing to move. And then something even worse happened. The door handle started to turn. Slowly, gently, testing. Not rattling, not banging, just trying to open. I thought I would pass out from fear. And then I heard the softest chuckle, low and slow, like something amused that I hadn't fallen for the trick. Footsteps followed, light and crunching over the gravel outside, until they faded into the woods. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun rose, I opened the door with shaking hands and checked the porch. Nothing. But the doorknob was smeared with a dark, sticky residue, like sap but darker. I showed my grandfather. He said nothing, only fetched a bucket and rag and wiped it away without a word. After that, I started sleeping in the same room as my grandfather. He kept an old shotgun beside the bed and a small wooden cross above the door. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn from violet to black, he finally spoke about it. Used to be folks up here that went missing. Always around fall. No trace. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Some say the forest takes them. Some say it's older than the trees. I don't know what it is, but I know it talks like someone you love. I didn't say a word. I just listened, heart quietly unraveling. The remainder of my stay passed in a strange silence. Nothing more came to the windows. No voices, no knocking. but I felt watched. Every time I stepped outside, I had the unshakable sensation that something followed my every move, waiting for me to step too far from the porch or forget to lock the door. I never did. I followed every rule. On the final morning of my stay, as I packed my things and loaded them into the car, I saw something in the tree line, two glowing red eyes, just hovering in the shadows, motionless. No body, no shape, just eyes. I didn't say goodbye to the woods. I didn't speak a word the whole drive back to town. Now, years later, I've never told anyone else what happened. Not my friends, not my partner, not even my parents. It feels like a secret meant to stay buried in those mountains. But every autumn, when the nights grow longer and the wind carries the scent of turning leaves, I hear that voice again, soft, gentle, calling my name from nowhere. Sometimes it sounds like my grandfather, sometimes like someone else. I never answer. I never open the door, because I know what waits on the other side. It isn't a ghost. It isn't a person. It's something older than fear, something that can wear your memories like a mask, and all it needs is one mistake, one response, one open door. So, I live my life with small precautions. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't sleep near windows in unfamiliar places, and no matter how familiar the voice may sound, no matter how convincing the words might be, I never, ever answer when someone calls my name at night, because the forest remembers, and it doesn't give up. Story 9. The Man Beneath the Streetlight. It was just after midnight when I left my friend's house, the kind of night where the world feels quiet and tucked away. I'd stayed longer than I meant to, caught in conversation, sipping warm tea while the rain whispered softly against the windows. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like black mirrors beneath the soft amber glow of the streetlights. My car was parked about 2 blocks down, just past a small park and a row of aging houses. The air was cool and still, not cold, but just enough to make you aware of your breath. I wrapped my coat a little tighter, adjusted the strap of my bag, and began to walk, heels tapping gently on the wet pavement, alone with thoughts and the subtle echo of my steps. As I passed the park, I noticed something strange near the far end of the sidewalk. One of the streetlights flickered softly, its glow pulsing irregularly like a candle about to go out. Beneath it stood a man, tall and completely still. He was facing away from me, his head slightly tilted downward, arms hanging limp at his sides. I slowed down a little, something instinctual tugging at my chest. There was something unnatural about how still he was, like a statue forgotten on the corner of an otherwise living world. I glanced around to see if anyone else was nearby. No cars, no people, no movement at all. Just me, the man, and the hum of that broken light buzzing above him. Trying not to draw attention, I crossed to the other side of the street, continuing my walk at a steady pace. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel the weight of his presence pulling at my attention. My mind raced through harmless possibilities. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just lost in thought. But none of those explanations felt right. I turned a corner, my car now in view, and that's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could tell from the rhythm that it wasn't just coincidence. Whoever that man was, he had started walking the moment I passed him. I picked up my pace, my heart quickening with every step. My hand tightened around my keys, thumb ready on the unlock button. The footsteps behind me sped up to match mine, not running, but close. Confident, I reached my car and darted into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it with shaking hands. As I started the engine, I looked into the rearview mirror. There he was, standing at the edge of the lot, just beneath another flickering light, still not facing me, still not moving. It was like he appeared there without walking, like he had skipped the space between. My hands trembled as I backed out and drove away, the streetlights blurring through my tears. I didn't look back again until I got home. For days, I convinced myself I imagined it, that maybe it wasn't as eerie as it seemed in the moment. I told myself it was just a stranger, maybe someone dealing with his own pain, his own story. But 3 nights later, it happened again. I was walking back from a late shift, crossing a different part of town, and there he was, beneath another flickering streetlight. Same posture, same height, same stillness. This time he was already facing me, though his face was cloaked in shadow. I stopped in my tracks. My breath caught. He didn't move. Not until I stepped off the curb. That's when he tilted his head slightly, like an animal curious about a sound. I ran. I don't remember the details of how I got home. I only remember the feeling, like something old and hungry was watching me. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw him 5 more times. Always late. Always in lonely places. Always under a flickering light. I tried reporting it, but what could I say? A man stands under streetlights and doesn't move. The police dismissed it. My friends gave me concerned looks and gentle reassurances. I started changing my routines, leaving earlier, avoiding isolated paths, even taking cabs for short distances, but it didn't help. Wherever I went, he found me. Never closer than 30 feet. Never speaking. Just standing. Just watching. The scariest part wasn't when he was there. It was when I expected him to be, and he wasn't. Those were the moments I felt truly vulnerable, because that's when I realized he was always in control. Eventually I stopped going out at night. I pulled down the shades, avoided windows, and left the hallway lights on while I slept. But even then, I dreamt of him. In those dreams, he wasn't silent. In them, he whispered things I could never remember upon waking, but the feeling lingered, hollow and ancient. One night, I awoke to the sound of electricity buzzing outside my apartment. I peeked through the blinds, heart hammering in my chest, and there he was, beneath the flickering lamp across the street, closer than he'd ever been. I couldn't look away. His face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Then, for the first time, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one arm and pointed directly at my window. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, pulling the curtain shut. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't move. When dawn finally broke, I looked again. He was gone. I don't know who he is or what he wants. I don't know why he follows me, or why he hides in light that doesn't stay steady. But I do know this: he's real. He's not just a man. He's something else. Something that lives just on the edge of our world, slipping between shadows and broken light. And if you ever find yourself alone at night, walking past a streetlight that begins to flicker, don't look. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't let him see your fear. Because once he does, he never stops watching. I moved shortly after that final encounter. Changed cities, jobs, phone numbers. Started fresh. For a while, it worked. I felt safe, but safety, like light, isn't always constant. A few weeks ago, I walked home after a dinner out, passing beneath a row of streetlights. Most glowed steady, but one flickered softly, gently. My heart stopped, and standing beneath it was a man, tall, still, head slightly tilted, facing away. I didn't wait. I turned, ran, and didn't stop until I was home, breath racked, tears falling freely. I don't think I'll ever truly escape him. Some things, once seen, become a part of you, a thread in your story that can't be cut. And I've come to understand he doesn't want to hurt me. Not yet. He just wants me to know he's there, watching, waiting, beneath the light that never quite stays on. Story 10. The Whispering Static. During my sophomore year of college, I lived off campus in a small, aging apartment complex on the edge of town. The building itself was quiet, tucked behind a stretch of overgrown trees, with creaky floors and thin walls that let in every passing sound from the street. My apartment was on the second floor, with a narrow balcony that overlooked a cracked parking lot, lit by a single dim bulb. It wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable. And for a college student trying to stay close to campus, it was enough. I didn't have many friends in that part of town, so I spent most evenings studying or listening to music, the television humming softly in the background to keep me company. The routine was peaceful, in its own quiet, lonely way, until one night, when I woke up to the sound of static. At first I thought it was my TV. I always left it on a low volume to help me sleep, usually tuned to a nature channel or something mindless enough to drift off to. But when I sat up and looked toward the screen, I saw that it was off, completely black. No light, no sound. Still the static buzzed faintly in the room, not loud but unmistakable. I checked my phone. No alarms, no missed calls. The clock read 2:47 a.m. That was when I noticed something strange. The sound wasn't coming from the TV. It wasn't coming from my phone or the hallway. It seemed to be coming from the balcony. Confused and unnerved, I crept toward the glass door and peered through the curtain. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the usual dim glow of the parking lot and the shadow of the stairwell. But then I noticed it. A small, old-fashioned television set sitting on the concrete outside my balcony door. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. The TV was the kind with dials and rabbit ear antennas, the kind you'd find in a dusty attic or thrift store, and it was on, flickering with nothing but static. No image, no channel, just white noise and grey snow dancing across the screen. I opened the door slowly, hesitant, my body tense with confusion more than fear. I stepped out and stared at it, trying to make sense of how it got there. There was no way someone could have placed it there without me hearing. And even if they did, why? Why bring me an old TV in the middle of the night, turn it on, and leave it running? As I reached out to turn the knob, the static shifted. It wasn't louder, but it wasn't just noise anymore. It began to take shape, words or something like them, hidden in the hiss. At first it was whispers, garbled, unclear. Then a voice broke through. Don't look away. My hand froze on the dial. The voice was not coming from the air around me. It was coming from the static itself, buried beneath the signal like a secret message. He's watching. I backed away slowly, heart racing. The screen flickered violently for a moment, the light strobing across the concrete like lightning. Then, as suddenly as it started, the static stopped. The screen went black. I waited, expecting something, anything, but nothing happened. The silence returned, thick and consuming. I dragged the TV back inside, unplugged it, and left it in the kitchen, unsure of what to do with it. I barely slept that night, and the next morning, I asked around the complex to see if anyone had lost a TV or seen anything strange. No one had. Most shrugged me off or looked confused. A few suggested it was a prank, but there was something about that voice, something knowing, cold and inhuman, that I couldn't ignore. I decided to get rid of it. I drove the old TV to a donation bin across town and left it there. When I returned, I checked the balcony compulsively, half expecting to see it again, but it was gone. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. A bizarre fluke, a strange night that I could write off as stress or sleep deprivation. But then it happened again. A week later, same time, same static. This time the sound came from my closet. I opened the door trembling, and there it was, another TV, different from the first, but just as old. No cord, no plug, yet the screen buzzed with static. He's closer, the voice said. Keep watching. I slammed the door shut and didn't sleep that night. The next morning the TV was gone. Just vanished. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. My grades slipped. I avoided my apartment for as long as I could each day, but the TVs kept appearing, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the bathroom. Each one delivered a message. Don't blink. He's inside. Only you can see him. The static followed me like a curse, embedded in places it had no right to be. I began seeing him too. At first just flashes, reflections in dark windows, a silhouette on my fire escape, a tall figure, featureless, faceless, always just far enough away that I could pretend it was imagination. But then, one night I turned on the TV voluntarily, needing to know what came next. The screen came to life without a signal, and for a moment I saw him, in full, standing in my hallway, his body flickering like it was made of television snow. And then he turned his head toward the camera, toward me. Don't change the channel, he whispered. I threw the remote and turned off the power, heart pounding in my throat. but the screen stayed on, and behind me, I heard footsteps in the room where no one else should have been. I moved out a week later. I never went back for the deposit. I left everything, even my laptop and clothes. I just couldn't stay. The TVs never followed me again, not physically. But sometimes when I flip through channels late at night or the power flickers during a storm, I hear the faint sound of static, just for a second. And sometimes, I swear I see a shape reflected in the screen, watching, waiting. I don't leave TVs on while I sleep anymore. I don't even own one. I keep my phone powered down at night, and when I dream, I often dream of the hiss, of the figure, of the voice whispering things I try hard to forget. There's something deeply unnatural about messages hidden in static. Something ancient, not ghostly, but more like a frequency, one that only certain minds can hear. Maybe I was just unlucky. Maybe the signal found me at the right moment of weakness. Or maybe I tuned into something that's always been there, humming beneath the noise of our lives, waiting for a listener. If you ever hear it clear, sharp, and just for you, do not respond. Do not search the channels. And above all, if you ever hear a voice in the static say your name, change the channel before it changes you. Ah,